What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Shooting the Shit Uncensored. I am your host, Piers Austin, and we're brought to you live by Multi-Continental Wrestling Alliance on Facebook and on YouTube. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into our show tonight. Tonight, we have a very, very special guest. He's an Australian wrestling legend. He's trained by Dean Malenko and wrestled all around the world. Guys, I'm excited to have him on. He's the IWA promoter, and he's run that company for the last 20 years, and we're going to get into IWA in just a second. But before we get into that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to take a quick second just to thank a couple of sponsors that make this show possible. First up is A-Rock Designs. Now, guys, A-Rock Designs is that company that everyone is seeing around all the Facebook groups and all the Facebook pages. They make custom wrestling cups, hoodies, keychains, T-shirts, tumblers, you name it, they make it. Guys, they made me this custom CM Punk tumbler. I absolutely love it. Everybody knows I'm a mark for CM Punk. Haven't put beer in it yet because I kind of would feel that's a little bit redundant putting beer in a straight edge superstars cup. But anyway, I digressed. Our next is Signal Studios. Now, Signal Studios is a recording studio based in Sydney, Australia. If you're an independent wrestler, you need some new entrance music, you can hit up Signal Studios and they make the best beats for you. They'll make the best beats for you, mix it, master it, all that good shit, and send it out to you wherever you are in the world. Or if you're a musician and you need a place to record or rehearse, they have the most comfortable setup possible. Guys, also my third sponsor, I don't have an image for yet, but I'm going to give a special shout out to WASIF Championship Belts. That's it, WASIF Championship Belts. Every wrestling fan in the world either owns championship belts or wants to own a championship belt. If you want a custom championship or a replica of your favorite championship belt, hit up WASIF Championship Belts on Facebook. All right, guys. Now, before I bring him in, he is the man, as I said, the Australian wrestling legend himself, Mark Mercedes. He runs IWA Australia, which is the longest running professional wrestling company in Australia that performs in both urban and rural New South Wales. Guys, let's bring him out. Mark, how you doing, buddy?
Hello, how you doing? Thank you for having me.
Mate, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been one that I've been trying to get for a while now, Mark, and I'm really honored that you could give us your time.
No, thank you for having me. A little bit tired. I've just been away on holidays for the last week and long drive back with the family, but I'm here and happy to have a chat and talk all things wrestling.
Mate, fantastic. How was the holiday, mate? Straight off the bat.
Yeah, good. Went down to Jervis Bay, New South Wales. Obviously, COVID, we can't go overseas and go around, but went to Jervis Bay, had a nice time. Kids ran around, did a lot of playing, did a lot of fishing, took the boat out. Bit cold to swim, did a little bit, but mate, very relaxing, had a lot of fun, and it's all about the kids just running around and just it was nice. It was just nice to escape. So it's good to get the boat out. Big boaty, so it was nice to get the boat out.
Nice, mate. You do any fishing on the boat, mate, or are you just ripping around the bay,
mate? I did lots. Unfortunately, I didn't catch any, but young fella, he caught a 47 centimeter flathead. So, really nice. So it was good.
Oh, good stuff, mate. So getting into, obviously, your background, Mark, before you got into professional wrestling, you got involved in amateur wrestling at around 18 years old. What drew you into the amateur style of wrestling straight off the bat?
I think at the time, and obviously I grew up with, pro wrestling, watching on Channel 10. I lived on the Central Coast at the time when I was going through school. So I was very lucky that I had both Sydney Network 10 and Newcastle Network, which was NBN at the time. So I got both WF Superstars 2 nights of the week. And I grew up watching that. And then when I graduated school and moved back to Sydney, wrestling was always something I was fond of. And I had met a friend through a video shop, and he had I had a friend of his actually who said, "Oh, he wrestles." I said, "Oh, wrestle, wow!" And I knew nothing about amateur wrestling. He said, "Oh, no, they do it just down the local, Hornsby PCYC." So I decided to lob down there one night and started it and thought, oh, wow, wrestling, this is really, really cool. Obviously no ropes, but started amateur wrestling and got involved and just did really well quick, and then met another guy you probably heard of, Greg Stecker, or Greg Smith, who was Greg Stecker back a long time ago. And we became friends and both decided that, pro wrestling is what we wanted to do. And it kind of evolved from there.
Yeah, and you were actually trained by Dean and Joe Malenko. How did that sort of all come to be?
So myself and Greg, who I was talking about, did the amateur wrestling. We were progressing along in that, and at the time, I don't know if you remember a company called IWA. It was owned by a guy named Rob Russin, who was a promoter out of Florida. Toured Australia. They did Wonderland and bought Kamala, Paul Orndorff, a bunch of guys out. And we had approached him and said, hey, look, we're interested in really getting into pro wrestling. How do we do this? And he put us in touch basically with Larry Malenko. And back in those days, way before Facebook and social media, those things, we wrote letters and said, look, we're two kids. We want to do this. This is what we've done, amateur background. How do we go about getting in? And basically applied and got into Malenko's Wrestling Academy. So then that was took about a year to sort of happen because, by the time you start writing and back and forwards, and then basically sold up everything I owned. So began to sold up every single item I owned, including my car and everything, just to afford to get enough money to get over there for a year and move to Florida. And luckily, Larry was very kind to have us in his house. And moved over there and began training.
But that's crazy though, because even back in that time around the 90s, it was like kayfabe was still pretty much alive, and being on the other end of the world as well. And you know what I mean? Like to be able to get there and to go over and train with the Malenkos, who are pound for pound one of the best wrestling families in history. I mean, some of the stuff that they've been able to do, and definitely their style. But, how was it? Like, obviously you mentioned being a younger guy, but going from Australia where you're used to, where everything has been home for you for such a long time, to then go to the opposite end of the world where it's like a different culture, and also, going into the pro wrestling training world, which is, obviously an intense and grueling procedure in itself.
Look, I mean, around that time I'd also met another guy, Tyrone Townsend, who kind of comes into the story later on, especially the IWA story later on. I think at the time I might have been working at the railways, and we met Tyrone. I think it was maybe at a show, maybe down at Ingleburn. So back in those days, there was very few shows going on in Sydney. There was Ken Dunlop and Bob Blass who were running a few shows with Harpers, and they were doing Liverpool and Ingleburn. So I'd met them there, and we were doing some training at Dovies and doing some bits and pieces, and really kind of the scene in Australia was really kind of probably at its lowest point. Steve Rackman had sold the business, and Dunlop and Pickford and Harpers had tried to run with it, but obviously there was no television, there was not much support, and clubs were changing the way they were doing business. So they'd gone from a lot of venues to a very small amount of venues. And they were trying to sort of keep that scene going, but it was very, very small. So I understood very quick that we weren't going to learn anything really here, and there was no real school or anything. So we learned very quick there was no use trying to make it here because there was nothing to make here. So it was really imperative that we got into overseas. And look, Larry was just such a wonderful person. He opened up his arms to many people from all across the world, from Japanese to people, kids in Germany and all over the world. And happily took us in and welcomed us in his house. And I think the special thing was not only did I learn so much about being in training there at the school, which was, running, 3 to 5 days a week, but also then obviously living with Larry. So you go back and then learn all his knowledge, and he'd sit down and talk to you and just communicate. So there's just 24 hours a day of consumption of, wrestling and about what's going on. And then obviously Dean would then come back from Japan. He'd be speaking to him and his, other son, Joe. So like, it was just such a massive, absorption of information. You just really couldn't start from scratch any better, and we were starting from scratch. So it really kind of set us up pretty quick to come back to here and what we could do.
Yeah. And how did you take to it? Like, obviously you're saying starting from scratch. How did you pick things up? Like, did you pick things up quite quickly when you were doing it because of the amateur background, or was it something completely?
Yeah. So obviously, as I said, so we've done a bit between Greg, myself, and Tyron here at a place called Davy's Gym, which ran back in the day in Oxford Street. But certainly, looking back at that, we were just sort of young guys just doing moves. So obviously learning psychology and how the whole business works, and not only just so much the part that you learn of taking bumps, storylining, all that kind of stuff. I think with Larry, I learned so much about the back end of the business, about how the business works. He was still promoting shows with another guy doing Suncoast Pro Wrestling, so I was learning first at hand about that whole promotion part of it and how to do it and what you're doing and how that back booking works and all those things. So it was just something that I was good at and just absorbed, and it just kind of clicked. I think I tried a lot of things in my life prior to that, but just something that just really hit with me. It's just like, wow, I get this.
And that's the thing. It's a lot to sort of learn, just to learn the sort of in-ring sort of stuff that it takes to be a professional wrestler, gimmick, and as you said, the psychology, the in-ring work, how to do a promo, but to also for you to sort of, while you were there, to sort of go, okay, how does the business end of it work? How does the booking of it, how do you put shows together? And to go into that sort of level as well, it's invaluable, the information you would have learned from that.
Yeah, and Larry was very quick in the early piece. It kind of taught me it's just not about a scrapbook; it's about a checkbook. And once you get that out of your head, that sure, this is a business that can wrap you up pretty quick. You absorb a lot of media. You spoke about, you get put in the paper, you're on TV, so it's very, very quickly to get wrapped up in your own ego and how you perform. But at the end of the day, it's about making money and making a living, and you've really got to try and wind yourself back and look at that as a business part about it. Otherwise, you're just another mark in the middle of the ring.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And after your year, over there, like, did you get to have any matches while you were over in the States? Because I know that you did work WCW. Was that while in that same year?
Yeah, so Larry was pretty adamant that for the very first probably about 6 to 7 months we had no matches. So we just trained. He did have some school shows that we ran that were our very, very first. And then we kind of got introduced to a fair bit of the Florida indies. So we did quite a few of the smaller indies of it. Guy named what was his name? Man Mountain Brody was a guy. He was running some small shows, which was probably my first official show I did. Blackjack Mulligan was running some shows around the time, so I did some shows for him. And then we got introduced through another guy, I think he was going up and working for Atlanta. I got introduced to Dave Penza, who then got us in to go up to Atlanta to start doing some jobs, early jobs. Went up and did a few of those, which were my famous ones, which was probably against Rick Rude, which was, phenomenal. And then did a couple of jobs, and then basically had a good couple of chats to Dusty and a few others who asked me then to come back and then do the power plant. So I went back and did the power plant, and then I guess I had a bit more of a relationship with them where I started coming in and doing some dark matches with RVD and Martel, and then the Nitros rolled in, and so got a bit of a role with them. So it was a nice time.
Was there any talk about offering you a contract from WCW in that time frame at all, or was it just, hey, let's see how this goes?
Yeah, there was some major talks of that. So I'd gone to Germany and Japan a bunch of times with the team, and then I was in Germany, and then Terry Taylor had flown me back to do the big Nitro, which I did. It was at the Georgia Dome. And then I went down for a Saturday night taping, I think. And then they basically asked me, can you come to Florida? You need to come to Florida. We're looking at contracting you. We want you to come to Florida. By that stage, I've been in Germany for about 7-8 months. My girlfriend at the time, who ended up being my wife, had flown to LA and was there waiting for me in LA, and they just said, you need to come to Florida. I was just burnt. I just said, I'm sorry, I'm done. I'm going to LA. Which kind of, I guess, probably fucked me in the end, But there's no regrets. I was burnt out, and it just wasn't the right time. I had to go.
Yeah, I mean, taking the time as well and being able to step back as well, it is probably a big decision because, if you go in there and you're already feeling burnt out and already feeling like that level of just exhaustion from it, what good is it going to come of it? Either you're going to get injured or someone else is going to get injured. And
in Germany, it was a huge, such a big opportunity to go and work for Otto over there and just that big role. So to then go back to them there. But the thing was, back in those days, it's not like now where there's, all these platforms where you can constantly be seen, you know what I mean? There was no platforms to be seen. So unless you were in their base and constantly going, hey, here I am, they weren't going to pick you up, you know what I mean? If you've gone and left, you're out of mind, out of sight. So it was a bit like that. But, you can't sit back and regret what you did. And at the time, it was the right decision. And, I'd had my beautiful wife over there, and it was the right thing. So,
yeah. And you moved to LA. Like, what were you doing when you were in LA? Were you still pursuing wrestling when you were there on the indie level?
No. So we wouldn't move to LA. My wife was in LA at the time. My girlfriend, wife to be, and because we hadn't seen each other for 8-9 months. I'd been on tour in Germany, so she originally was to meet me there, and we'll go on a big holiday. And I already put it back because obviously Nitro and a bunch of shows happened. So she'd already been in LA for a week or two. And you can only imagine if I'd given her a call saying, I'm sorry, I'm heading to Florida for another 2 or 3 weeks, it would have been a very different outcome of how my life would have been. Then I bowed to LA and just spent some time and chilling out in Vegas and, and then
recharging the battery. Yeah, and where, you mentioned going over and wrestling, Germany and Japan. How was it going over there, and especially being, obviously young into the business as well? How did you find pardon me, how did you find going and working with people where English wasn't a first language for them? Like, that would have been, sort of mind-boggling and sort of like nerve-wracking as it is going into a show with people where English might not be their first language, or they could speak it that clearly. Was that a concern?
No, not really. That was probably another thing that that I was so lucky that I went with Malenko's. And then a big thing about training at the Malenko's was all about that, is just knowing your groundwork so well and knowing body language so well, and just learning that you don't have to call. And it's you found certainly back in those days that, certain styles were so different, and certainly the style that Malenko taught, which was very much Japanese, because obviously he had a lot of kids that went to Japan, that, you had to know what you were doing because language wasn't your first thing. Whereas if you go to Canada, it was a very much more scripted kind of, role and all that kind of, especially today. So no, I felt quite comfortable. I mean, I think my favorite matches in Germany was certainly with a guy named Osamu Nishimura, who spoke English, but a bunch of times, we really, our match was just barely 2 words. We just knew it to go out there and work. I think that's the beauty about, someone who can perform and perform well, is that they understand and work in that and just listen, and so many different things you're listening for, the crowd, what they're doing, what you're doing, and what the referee, and the dynamic in Germany is phenomenal. I mean, we had Mick McMichael, who was one of the most best referees I think I'd ever refereed under, who was the wealth of knowledge, and was just, you learn with so much, and Fit Finlay and Tony Sinclair and just all them kind of guys just jumping in with, and they're just a bank of knowledge. So it's just once again, it's just you're just constantly learning.
Yeah, and just to sort of take it back a step, you mentioned obviously wrestling on Rick Rude, very early on in your career. Can you tell us what was that match like? Was Rick like a decent sort of guy to you backstage?
I can barely remember that. I remember that the music hit, that ravishing hit, and I was literally like a deer looking into headlights. It was just like, it was the most overwhelming experience, because obviously here I am, a kid from Australia, thinking, shit, I want to break it in professional wrestling. And I remember the music hit, and I'm looking up at the sign thinking, holy shit, I'm the guy he's coming out to beat the shit out of. You know what I mean? Like, how the fuck did this happen? Can I say that? Can I say the word?
Yeah. No, we're uncensored, man.
So yeah, it was just like, how is this possible? Yeah, he was an absolute sweetheart. He was such a nice guy. You know, beforehand, he just, you know, went through and said a whole bunch of stuff. You know, this is what we're going to do. Smoked a couple of cigarettes, came out, hit his music. We did our match, came back in, thanked me very kindly, and it was a really nice. It was a nice introduction to you know, sort of the bigger time wrestling.
Yeah, I actually just watched that match before I came on with you, and you could definitely see that a young Mark Mercedes there. I hardly recognized you. I was like, wait, is this the same guy? And they're like, Sydney, Australia. Like, okay, all right, must be the same guy.
Green as hell.
Hey, man, we all got to start somewhere in anywhere, you know? So, you know, and starting out wrestling against Rick Rude on WCW is definitely the place to learn your ropes. But when you decided to come back to Australia, you know, what was the mindset when you were coming back here? Was it like, I'm going to come back, start a promotion and get this ball rolling? Or was it like, I'm going to come back and try and find the promotions out there?
Well, not really. So, yeah, I came back from my first time from Malenko's, and then I was back for about maybe 3 to 4 months because I ran out of money. And I think I'd maybe done that first job for WCW, but, you know, you're still sort of feeling. So I came back and worked for my dad, and then got my job back at the railways, and did that for a few months, and realized, you know, this is just not what I want to do. What am I doing back here? This is, you know, so I just saved a bunch of money and thought I need to get back to the States again. So then I went back to Malenko's again, spent another 3-4 months over there, which I kind of needed. It was just that follow-up, you know, of everything that I'd done. And then came back to Australia, and then I kind of met back up with Tyrone, who I spoke. And Tyrone at the time had just finished his university, or was completing his teaching degree, and he'd just done a big thing on lesson blocks and how you would do a wrestling block. And we decided that let's start this wrestling school, and we did that. And I'd come back and done some shows for the old promotion, which was Dunlop and Harpers. And I was pretty dissatisfied with how they were running, and just, you know, it was kind of very tired. And I thought at the time, A, they weren't paying me enough. B, this wasn't the direction I wanted to see Australian wrestling go. So I chatted to Ty and said, maybe we should start looking at something. And I really had no idea how to start the wrestling in Australia, other than I had a very few limited contacts of a couple of venues. And I came home one day, got a lift back from Ken Dunlop, who come back in the car and was driving me back to where I was living at the time. And in the car, me and Ken have never had the greatest relationship. And now back today, I've met with him and we get on fine. But back in the day, you know, obviously I was a lot younger and he was a lot older, and there was that whole thing. And he was telling me all these venues he was wanting to get and all this. He was just spilling all this information to me. I'm thinking, right, he's telling me this venue, this venue, this venue, and this venue. Maybe I should be hitting these venues up. So it just kind of clicked, and I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to start hitting these venues up and just, you know, let's just start something up. So we did that and started setting some stuff out, and then lo and behold, our first gig was the Raw Easter show. We managed to snag one of our biggest gigs we've ever done, and did the full Raw Easter show. And we snagged that, and I bought out Rasta the Voodoo Man, who was one of my friends in Germany, who was an American guy, and thought, you know, I'll bring him out. So we started that, and then we kind of got the Bankstown Trotting Club, which they had, and then just the ball started rolling, you know. We were really extremely lucky that when we had just started that, that whole Attitude Era had started, and Stone Cold Steve Austin at The Rock had just started to take off, and wrestling just went from here to here. And because of that, every club thought, wrestling, fuck, that's cool, we want this. And literally from from 1 month to 2 months to 3 months, we went from one venue to had wrestling 10 nights a month, it just exploded. It was just insane.
Wow, that's impressive. And you mentioned Tyrone Townsend, who was obviously, as you mentioned, the co-owner of IWA, which funnily enough, about a year ago, I ran into him in Bondi. So, as people watching the show know that I'm a big wrestling fan, and I've made mention before when we've had IWA stars on, I used to attend a lot of, I say early IWA shows, early for me in the early 2000s. And I remember Ty on commentary and those shows that you guys had, which is still probably in the first couple of years of IWA's operation. And it was, it was a different beast than it was something crazy. Like some of the crowds that you guys were able to pull as well were just ridiculous.
It was serious. It was like we were just so lucky to be in that time that the wrestling took off. I mean, we were getting places like the Central Coast Leagues Club, and we had, I remember we did a tag team tournament there, and like legit drew 820 something people. It was out of this world. We were doing Shell Harbour Workers and putting, 600-700 people in a month. It was just unbelievable. And we're sitting there scratching our heads thinking, holy shit, like, how is this possible, And every venue we rang or spoke to just said, yep, we're there. And then we started just doing all the Sydney stuff, and we thought, well, this is working really well. Sydney's working well. Why isn't regional New South Wales working well? And we decided that we wanted to become more a touring act rather than just base ourselves in Sydney. So we started touring, and then it just
And
25 years later.
and that's the thing. IWA, back in those early days, when you go into business with someone, and not just in pro wrestling, but any type of business, did you guys sit down and go, right, Mark, you're going to take care of this, this, and this? Ty is going to take care of this, this, and this? Or was it just something that you guys worked coincidentally with each other in perfect unity?
Oh, no, I think we kind of had a rough idea. I mean, Ty had for what that time was a social media, if there was social media in that day, he had that down. I knew nothing. So he knew all about MacBook computers, the artwork, getting sort of that artwork up for venues, all that kind of more back end, where I was probably more live event stuff. So looking after the boys, training the guys, booking the venues and stuff, and then Ty would be more that other end of, sending the promo, doing the press releases. At the time, we had a wrestling magazine out, or putting out. So he was doing all that kind of stuff. So we kind of our jobs just kind of melted and just aligned. It just kind of worked well. It was just, he lived at the time in Surrey Hills, and we had turned that into a wrestling office, and there was just, we worked absurd hours, many, many nights up to, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the morning working on stuff, and just it was an upside down world of traveling and being in an office and sending, it was nuts.
It must have been a fun time, though, for like two young guys that sort of broke into the wrestling business around the same sort of time, and then here you are running a promotion and going all over, New South Wales, both rural and suburbia as well. So, but as far as the IWA name, what's the origins of that? Like, was that just something you guys were playing around with different letters and seeing what sort of fit?
Well, I think a couple of reasons we chose IWA was because IWA was a very original name back, if you look at that sort of 20 years of pro wrestling back, Waddy Ayoub and all that stuff. So IWA was actually a company and was quite an original name here in Sydney. And then the Wonderland stuff had happened, and we kind of thought, it's catchy, it is what it is, and it has a bit of background thing to it, so we should do IWA. Originally, it was going to be AWF because I originally came up with AWF, contrary to one other person who thinks he owns it. I actually came up with AWF because I'd done a tour called Wrestle Riot, and I aligned with a promoter and Frontier Touring Company and came up with a name and put it all together. And then obviously that was back when we were Chris Benoit and Junkyard Dog and Neidhart and the whole lot. We'd done that. And then we'd done those 2 big tours, and then it just kind of the name had lapsed, and then another person then latched onto it and ran with the name. But I originally had owned that. Since I couldn't have taken that, I then decided, IWA is what we wanted to do.
Yeah, and even the IWA initials and stuff like that, it's a catchy thing that people can chant, that people can get into it as well. There are other promotions in the world that have the same initials, but obviously, having that Australian sense to it as well, that International Wrestling Australia, it sounds. You know what I mean? Like,
go back through that Australian wrestling history book. IWA goes back a long way, and the IWA Championship goes back a long way too. So we kind of, really kind of dug that sort of back end of it. So we thought, yeah, that's really cool. We should run with that, and that's kind of where IWA came from.
And putting together, the early shows for IWA with Wonderland, and as you were saying, how did you, start booking those shows and getting, wrestlers to come and work for you? Was it sort of, putting out ads and stuff like that to try and find people, or was it, people pretty much found you guys?
It was pretty much people found us. It was bizarre. It was just, combination of coming to shows and, back in the day, I think there was really only one wrestling forum, and that was Rowan's site was one of the very first, that whole discussion board, which really was kind of the big area of the grievances of different promotions and things. And so that was really the only kind of early internet where people would, find about other wrestling promotions. But yeah, it was just kind of natural. People came and we found someone, or someone knew someone. And before you knew it, you kind of had a pretty decent little crew running. We had a wrestling school we started, and we ended up running that for many, many years and put a bunch of people through that school, and some that stayed with us for a long time. Some short, some long, but it was pretty incredible.
How did you find running the wrestling school? Like, as far as like going and teaching people and coaching people, as I mentioned earlier, that we had Mick Moretti on yesterday, and obviously he's a coach here as well in Australia. Is patience have a lot to do with it, or is it just understanding that everyone starts out at some point?
Yeah, everyone starts out at some point, and I probably never thought I was probably the greatest teacher. I'm one of these people who, I guess, with wrestling to me just came so natural. So I sometimes found it pretty hard that if someone didn't get something, in my brain, why can't they get this? It's just, so obvious. So I kind of had to really teach myself into take a way back thing and really try to explain that. I think I had to be kind of a teacher by, I just had to do it because there was no one else to do it. You know what I mean? So it wasn't probably my most chosen thing to want to be an instructor. But to get talent, we realized we had to create new talent, especially in the early days. So it was just something that we had to do. And then, of course, obviously, once you sort of get one or two, and I was very lucky that in the early days, the Michael Promuticos came out and the Rob Matrixes and those guys who got it, and then could help within that. So that kind of then that dynamic kind of, grew, because it wasn't just me teaching, it was them who getting it, and they were then teaching people. So I was very, very lucky in that I had some hand in that they were then organically teaching, you know what I mean? So.
Yeah, and you mentioned those two for a start, but is there any other memorable names for you that were there that trained in those early days that went on to be a foundation for IWA?
Oh my God, there's just so many different names. I mean, Catherine Nixon, who was there from day one, who, turned up in the very first day, this, small little shy girl who wanted to be in pro wrestling and thought, wow, how's this going to go? And then, spent, an abundance of years and just did so well and was a pioneer for women's wrestling in Australia. So she was there, Bermudico, Billy Cole, Rob Matrix, Leif Jeffries, who was around there for a long time. Jesus, who else? There is just literally so many names that just went through that place, They came and trained day in, day out. We're speaking about Mehdi Basiri, who was one of the early guy who came in and wrestled, and we had so many different colourful kind of people come in, so...
It was, man. I remember going to some of those shows, man, and just obviously, as mentioned, I was friends with Mehdi and getting to go to some of these shows and meet these guys before and after the show. Just the personalities that I saw and my introduction to pro wrestling of the actual performers to them was, truly amazing. Like some of these collective bunch of people that you guys had there, which, and the shows that were itself were just absolutely spectacular. And the fact that nearly everyone on these shows were all homegrown talent. They were all trained by yourself or all, other trainers at the IWA school. Yeah, that's got to be a massive, accomplishment for you guys, because you guys did put out a lot of great talent and, still have.
And then you take that big melting pot of misfits and put them on the road and say, all right, let's tour this thing,
I can imagine some of the stories that would have come out of that, though, Mark.
Oh, God. I'm still scarred.
And that's the thing, man, like those wild stories. And I'm friends with a guy named Angel Medina who wrestled in ECW, and some of the stories that he tells me, man, I just sit there and be like, what the fuck is wrong with some of you people? And he's like, hey man, this is pro wrestling, baby. That's like, all right, man, rock and roll, man. But putting the shows together and obviously putting the training school together as well, did you find, did you put rules down, or not rules, but I'd say, did you give suggestions to some of these young guys training? Look, come to the shows, be there at every show, watch what's going on, sit there and watch match from like bell to bell. Was that some of the things that you were instructing these guys to help with their learning process throughout it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we kind of, I took a lot from what Malenko had taught me and tried to encompass that into Australian wrestling. And that kind of goes from, you learn, you turn up, start the shows, loading the ring in, learning that, becoming a referee or picking up the, jackets or whatever's required, helping with the sound, doing running, doing that stuff, then moving into then doing a run in, and then moving into then slowly going up and just doing an angle and get beaten up and thrown out of the ring, and then slowly being in a tag team or so. So it was a ever evolvement of guys, and some people took it up a lot quicker. Some people that, took slower. I mean, people like Billy Cole, Rob Matrix was just, that they just got it. Before they knew it, they were doing singles matches and blowing the place away. Some people took time to evolve and it took a long time. And some people took time to evolve and I thought we're never going to make it, but suddenly became some of the best guys we had. Some people just were there for years and still couldn't get it today. But that's just part of showbiz. I mean, a lot of things go into be a great wrestling. It's just not about the talent of being able to wrestle to that. It's the entertaining part of it, the psychology part of it, the dynamic of getting on with the rest of your crew, the dynamic of just understanding of where you are on the card and how to move up or stay where you are or what you're doing. And some it's hard because, especially when you're backstage and you're trying to juggle 12, 14, 15 egos of who they all think they should be main event versus not main event, and maintain that and keep them happy and keep them involved. And, let's face it, Australian wrestling's not about making big bucks. So you're talking about guys who are, spending a bunch of their time traveling, doing stuff for not exactly huge financial rewards. So I think the fun thing about what I tried to keep in our culture of IWA was not try and take ourselves too seriously. It was more about the camaraderie and just to really enjoying the dynamic of the show, the performing, and the having a really, really good vibe backstage. And for a long, long time, IWA was almost, we described it was almost like trying to be selected into the Australian cricket side, you know what I mean? Like we had a very, very select crew that we kept. And for a long time weren't liked because we didn't use a lot of other guys who were starting to do that. We had a very, very, we were the band, we're together, If you want to get into the band, you need to earn your right into the band, because the band clicks, and we're not changing the band too much because we want it to remain that way.
Yeah, you definitely saw that in those days, and that was the thing, is like going to an IWA show, you getting to see the regular fans that were going back in those days. You're seeing those same faces, and you see a lot of the fans that were the same fans going to a lot of the shows which were close by. The ones I went to in Sydney, I saw quite a few of the same people attending, and even the wrestlers themselves, it's like they had a passion for it, which was so unique. Especially for like, I want to say indie wrestling, which is like, a lot of the times it's, people just show up, oh, it's a wrestling show, I'm going to check it out. Where back then there was a lot of hardcore fans, especially the IWA. So, but
yeah, it was also a really hard time in the fact that, obviously the US was so enormous. WCW was pumping, WWF was pumping. So you've got to be really, and Australia's a completely different market. As much as, we buy the WWF and WCW product, if we go out there and try and emulate that, we just look like dickheads.
yeah.
So it was that hard thing of trying to be that, you're first of all competing that, you don't have the budget of their show. So, no pyro, no kind of, massive arenas and screens and all those things. So you're trying to work within something that we had, which was the clubs and their setting and what they were doing. At the same time, trying to make it Aussie, as in that have our own characters and have our own storylines, but at the same time have that mix of what American wrestling is. And that was a real hard balance to try and get, because if you try and emulate too much, you just come off really tacky. If you don't, you just kind of lose interest. So that was always a constant juggling act to try and keep that kind of thing happening.
Did you ever find, obviously, when training guys, and a majority of these guys would have been fairly young, having, young wrestlers coming in and starting out, did you have to sort of really, do they try and say, oh, no, this is my gimmick? And it's like, wow, that seems like the exact same thing this person's doing over in America.
Oh, yeah. I remember going to wrestling school, and, the guys are like, had been there for like literally not even a day, and they're asking, well, when do I get to do the people's elbow? It's just like, mate, But look, I think
we're all fans. We're all fans,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely, including myself. So, of course, it's part of when you're going out there and doing that. But I think for the main thing, the main guys that we had, they smartened up pretty quick to what they want to do, and the ones that did that, I guess, probably didn't excel long in the business, but at the same time, there's no shame in that either, because they wanted to do that and wanted to have that part. And even if it was to go to wrestling school for 2 or 3 days and enjoy yourself and feel that getting a bump and drilling people's elbow, that was part of their experience. But once again, as I said, we were back in those days, in those early shows, we were literally a band, and I was very, very adamant to all my guys, especially when the break of Greg and AWF and some other offshoots was, this is the band. We don't move. We don't fucking go to other shows. People come to see AWA because they come to see you, and you. If you go out and dilute yourself, we're nobody. We stay focused, and we stay strong. We do 10 times more gigs. We get out there and we do that. And that was our mantra for a long, long, long time. These days, completely different. That's just not going to happen. But back in then, it was that. If you were going to walk off and go somewhere else, you weren't coming back, and there was someone else lining up to not even want to do that. So,
Yeah, 100%. And as far as Australian wrestling today, you mentioned obviously times have changed, but how do you find the state of Aussie wrestling, let's say pre-COVID?
Look, wrestling's changing all the time, and I find it very hard to be really engaged in wrestling these days. I've done 25 years of it, and I must admit that over the last 10 years, my thoughts on the business and my attitude in the business changed somewhat. I have a lot of the things I want to do these days. Obviously, you know, my kids are growing up. I have other things I want to do. I've been on the road, and as you enter your later 40s, which I am, you just start to think, you know, wrestling consumes so much of my life. So I felt like it was probably time to move on to other things. Where is the business today? I mean, certainly, you know, IWA in the last couple of years had a really good couple of runs. We had some really good new blood in there and some really good new talent. The likes of PWA turned up and really started to excel in what they wanted to do. And then, of course, there's a lot of shit that runs around that poses themselves as wrestling and really are they just kids jumping around the trampoline. And unfortunately, that stuff sometimes gets more headlines than the stuff that's done good. And it's just a shame because there's some certainly people out there who run wrestling shows who should be nowhere near the wrestling fucking industry.
Yeah, I mean, that one of the things, as I mentioned before, Angel, who's watching the show, he says, you know, the business went down the shitter, and he's talking obviously from an American perspective. But you know, obviously, as you said, it sounds very similar to what's occurred here in Australia. But you know, IWA and also your wrestling career, Mark. You know, a couple of years ago, you decided to hang up the boots. You know, was there a health reason behind that, or was it just, you know, for you, it was the right time to step away?
No, there's no major health reason, but I certainly had issues with, you know, my lower neck and my tailbone, but it wasn't so much the health. I mean, that was a contributing factor. I think it was just time. I just didn't want to be probably seen as, you know, a guy who was lingering on, and I guess my ego tells me that I don't want to be seen as, oh wow, I remember seeing that guy when he was young, he was really, really good, and now he's kind of overweight and looks like shit, and he's still out here lingering on. I just didn't want to be that guy, and yeah. I guess I kind of I'm in a really, really lucky place where I get paid the same amount whether I'm on the stage or whether I'm sitting backstage, just, you know, organizing stuff. And I think, you know, I just felt was comfortable with what I'd done. I was comfortable in the stuff I'd done here, comfortable with stuff I'd done overseas. And, you know, before bigger injuries hit in, I kind of thought maybe this was the right time to do it. You know, discussion with the wife and everything else, and thought, you know, it was time to do it. And I think, you know, other projects started to creep in. You know, I wanted to play golf. I wanted to go and do other things and just, you know,
not feel sore for a week.
Not feel sore, yeah. I mean, like, God, you know, I mean, I forgot how much just every day you wake up feeling sore and doing that. It's just like, my God, I don't do that anymore.
But
yeah,
sorry?
No, go.
I was just going to say, but, you know, since the retiring from the in-ring, have you found that you've been able to, you know, have that more quality time in the backstage area, and have you enjoyed that part of it a little bit more? Or is it the same?
Absolutely. And that's a really hard thing, you know, especially during, I guess, when IWA was, at, say, its peak, was that juggling between being on stage. It's a bit like being a director and a producer, you know what I mean? And on camera, off camera, you know, how do you dedicate that same time of being on camera and off camera? At the same time, you're really mindful of, I'm calling the shots, and if I'm on top, not trying to be that wanker, there's why you're on top, because you're booking yourself. And I never wanted to be like that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was always really conscious of wanting to try and bring through other guys. If you probably look through my career, I lost way more matches than I won. So it was never about that. It was more about that. So I kind of was always maybe gravitated to being more backstage, pointing the camera rather than being up the camera. Don't get me wrong, I love the admiration, you know, of being out there and the fans and the cheer and all that stuff. You know, it's something that once you have, it's something you miss and never get back. But it was a pretty easy transition. Like, yeah.
And that's the thing. It's, you're still involved in the business. And I think it's not like you've just completely just gone, all right, I'm done with wrestling now and it's time to walk away. It's, you still have that involvement. But, also another thing I want to ask, when you decided to sort of, because IWA ceased operation for its wrestling school, or you guys stopped training wrestlers for a while, what was the reason there? Was it just, obviously so you could invest time more with family and other ventures?
We had a relationship with Father Dave at Dulwich Hill, who had a wrestling ring in there, and I think there was a fire or he had something go on. And I think it was almost the perfect time because at that time I really was probably time poor, and it was a big ask to not only be looking. I had a toddler, looking after my daughter, trying to keep a happy marriage and family, touring, working. We also had a restaurant at the time was running. So the wrestling school kind of, I guess, was probably the lowest part of that there. And we're also at that point, I think also that organically there was so many wrestlers coming through from wherever that I didn't need that we had to constantly feed it through us. They were coming through other places and I was quite happy picking. And slowly but surely that whole band thing was getting less and less and less, and we were starting to use other guys. And we had our regulars, but people were kind of wanting to do other things, and so yeah, that kind of, I guess that's where it started.
Sure. And another thing I always wondered as well, because you guys had a tag team, had tag team division there for a long time, and tag titles, and then you guys just pretty much just stopped the tag titles. Was there a reason behind that? Was it just to sort of have only focus on the main belt and also the Trans Tasman title?
I'm not sure. I remember we had the tag titles. Once again, I think it was just probably a bit of the sign of the times. We had some good tag teams at the time that were around, and then kind of the tag teams dried up a bit. I mean, just less guys available that want to be a tag team. I'm not sure it was part of that. I think it was just something that just kind of happened. It was no decision of why we just drop out the tag. As I said, certainly we're doing those, early day tag team tournaments and stuff like that. I think we probably became a lot more conscious. I mean, certainly, there was a lot of waves in the business and time, when the wrestling business was big and then sort of came down and we lost clubs and other things. So certainly budgeting came into it as well. You can't always have 14, 16, 18 guys on the show and think, you're going to make money. At the end of the day, we had to function as a business. And you think back when we were running, we had a truck that we were running full time, the staging and the insurance and paying the guys and paying me and Ty and paying, all those bills that had to happen. So I'm sure probably budgeting came in on that as well.
Yeah, right. And, IWA is returning on Saturday, the 21st of November for the first live event since March at St. John's Bowling Club with the show Relentless. Mark, obviously, what can we expect from this upcoming show?
Yeah, no, it's weird. It's just, I mean, and it's funny, probably pre-COVID, I probably wanted a big break from wrestling. Never expected to get it. It was just because I've never had it. Yeah. And then we've had it. It just feels like forever since we've had a wrestling show. So it's going to be nice for the guys to get back together. It's been a long, long, long time. And yeah, get back and get the band rolling again, all the boys are psyched, and I've spoken to them. We've talked about getting everything happening, and I think it's just so weird because it's just something, and just not only my guys, because obviously my guys work elsewhere and do other things as well. I think the whole wrestling industry in Australia and the world is just starting to come back and see some live events again because there's been a lot of nothing. So it's certainly affected the way we have done business. And with the touring and stuff like that, and obviously we do our big North Coast tour every January, and some of my ag show stuff, that we do. So it'd be good to get it back on the road. And it's been a good break for me mentally away from wrestling, which I think I needed to have some space to come back and feel positive. It's very hard after 25 years to constantly remain positive and constantly drive the machine. And I know, a couple of my top guys who I work with, I guess I call my executive, who below me put up with a lot of shit, and are saints because they put up with my mood swings and my things when I'm down and just think, fuck this, I don't want a bar of it anymore. And, they are very supportive. And without that team around me, this wouldn't work. So it's good. So I'm excited to come back and get the show rolling.
It's good to hear that you're excited about it, Mark. I'm definitely going to try and make it. It is the same night as my mother's birthday, but I am going to do my best to make it out to the show and meet a couple of you guys and have a drink after the show as well. So, but Mark, why don't you, as we wrap up, can you tell everyone where they can find IWA on social media, where they can support and follow the IWA product?
Well, we're certainly, have our website, iwawrestling.com.au, and we're on Facebook and Twitter, Instagram. We have that. We've got Rob, who looks after that and does a fantastic job in that. And I must admit, I'm not the biggest social media person. That's not my forte, but we're certainly out there. And I just, like to take this opportunity to thank, all the people who watch the show who have, over the years, come to watch us, because without you, I wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't have the opportunity to have a career, make money, and I've been very, very, very blessed and lucky that I'm one of the few Australians who have made a good living out of wrestling, and has done me very, very well. And you look back and, you've got to be very, very thankful for those kind of things, because a lot of people haven't, and a lot of people have tried. And there's been a lot of people who I owe my success to. And, as I said, there's been so many guys who've come through IWA, people who have helped me through those periods. And without their help, I wouldn't have been here today talking to you about our story.
Absolutely. And look, thank you very much, Mark, for your time. I know you're a busy man. Joel Southgate says IWA is the best, and he'll see you in November as well. So, Mark, again, thank you so much for giving up your time this Thursday evening. To the audience as well, thank you so much for everyone for tuning in. It's great. If you're in Sydney, please go and check out IWA Relentless on Saturday, the 21st of November at St. John's Bowling Club. From one wrestling fan to everyone else out there, you will not be disappointed with IWA's product, I promise you that.
And we didn't even get to talk about road stories or whatever else. So I'd be happy to come back another time and talk about some road stories and about the wild things of what we may or may have not got up to.
Absolutely, Mark. I was just about to mention that I want to get you back on for a part 2. So, guys, thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned. Me and Mark will be back for part 2 in the near future. Thanks, guys, and thanks, Mark.
Thank you.